welcome to Love and Lost, Reflecting on Your Roots. My name is Maha Eid. I'm the stage manager for this event. I'm pleased to welcome you to our 10th annual Wild Writers Literary Festival, which is brought to you by Wordsworth Books, the Balsidi School of International Affairs, and the New Quarterly Literary Magazine. Before we begin, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks for our festival donors and sponsors, including the Ontario Arts Council, the NAP Wealth Management Team of RBC Dominion Securities, and the Audi in Kitchener and Waterloo. And now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this event, Lamis Al-Adari. Lamis holds a Ph.D. in English Language and Literature from the University of Waterloo, where she has been teaching creative and academic writing since 2015. She has published a collection of poems titled From the Wounded Banks of the Tigris, and more recently, a memoir titled Waiting for the Rain. Her poems have appeared in About Place Journal, the New Quarterly, the Malpay Review, and the anthology Al-Mutanabbi, Street Starts Here. She is a nonfiction editor with the New Quarterly and a co-coordinator for the X-Page Storytelling Workshop for Immigrant Women. And now, to begin our festival, I will turn things over to Lamis, who will introduce Kamal.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking TNQ and the Wild Writers Festival for allowing me to get to meet wonderful writers every year and talk to them. So this is another year with a wonderful book and a wonderful writer. And Kamal Al-Solaylee, I hope I'm saying that correct, holds a PhD in English and is the director of the School of Journalism, Writing and Media at the University of British Columbia. He's the author of the nationally best-selling memoir, Intolerable, a Memoir of Extremes, which won the 2013 Toronto Book Award and was a finalist for the CBC's Canada Reads, as well as the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction. His second book, Brown, which is on my list of books to read, What Being Brown in the World Today Means to Everyone, was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction, as well as the Trillium Book Award. Brown won the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for political writing. He's a two-time finalist for the National Magazine Awards and won a gold medal for his column in Sharp in 2019. So he has been very, very busy, and I'm very happy that he has time to meet us and talk with us today. So I got a chance to read. This is, I know it's not correct, but it's Return. This is the book that we'll be talking. How are you, Kamal?
Good, how are you? Thank you so much for this lovely introduction.
Well, I'm very, very pleased to be having this conversation with you. As you could tell from our meeting last time that I was bubbling, because the book spoke to me so much. I'm an immigrant, and it kind of touched on a lot of things that I have been feeling in the past few years. I'm going to start with a few questions, and before I go on, I want everybody to know that Q&A is open, and if you have any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to ask. There's a Q&A section that you can put your questions in, and we'll get to them either as we go along or at the end. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first thing that caught my attention in your book, and then you can tell us why. So you started with, where do you want to be buried? So this question has been on my mind for the past few years, but why is this so important? Why did you want to open your book with, where you want? It seems so final and ending, right?
Right, yeah, so so I began with the end in a way. Yes, I wanted, this is a book about people who return to their homeland, and the idea of return is very important, but so is the idea of a homeland. What is a homeland, and what is it? Our adopted homeland? Is it? Can we still have multiple homelands? All these questions, and I couldn't think of a way to resolve the tensions between adopted and ancestral homeland, where we came from and where we are, our past and our present. Then kind of this question, where do you want to be buried? What was to me the most direct, powerful testimony or decision in life that says, that sort of decides what is the homeland then where you want your remains to be forever and ever till eternity. Like, what is that place that is a resting place till the end of time? And that would be a pretty clear indication of where is your home. And if you said, as I said at the time when I was asked that question in 2012, and that's the story that begins the book, to me, it was a clear option. It was a clear answer. It was Toronto at the time. And now, almost 10 years later, I am not only am I not sure, but I don't think it will be Toronto.
Okay. We have a saying in Islam that no one knows where they're going to be die or they're going to be buried, right?
Right, right.
But it's so interesting when you think about it, how we've all been kind of displaced or moved away from our homes and the places that you think you're going to, I have a plot to be buried in, but it's back home. I don't know if
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's really interesting that this is something that comes up in the very beginning. And it kind of like from the very beginning, I started reading and I was like, oh my God, does he know what I'm thinking? So I'm wondering, how other immigrants are thinking about this, right? How are they dealing with it? Have they kind of, said, no, I'll be here and things are fine. But there seems to be also more in your book about connections, and it's not just the land, but it's the language. It takes a very prominent place in the work. So what is this connection? Why do you need to know Arabic? I mean, you know some Arabic.
It's my native tongue, yeah.
So why does it have to be Arabic? I mean, you speak English. Isn't that enough?
Well, I mean, there is more to the language than the ability to speak. There's a community, there is culture, there is a sense of belonging, there's a sense of understanding the context of your family's history and origin and story. And I was born in the Middle East. I was born in Aden, which is in South Yemen. I grew up in Beirut and Cairo. But at some point in my late teens, I decided that I really need to forget Arabic. I really need to erase Arabic, turn English into a first language and study English literature, and then go to England and do graduate school all the way to a Ph.D. in English. And then in the future go somewhere else where I only speak English. And on the path to making English a kind of my first language by default, I forgot my Arabic. And at the beginning, I thought it was a victory in a way. I thought, like, I won. I finally get rid of that language that was kind of hobbling me. That was there are many reasons. I mean, as a gay man, I always thought that Arabic and Arabic culture were very hostile to gay identity, to same-sex relationships and desire. And I really wanted to separate myself from that. I mentioned that in my first book. Like, it was really important to live with dignity, with my head held up high, and not to be ashamed of who I am. And Arabic always made me ashamed of who I am. There's no word that that translates to gay. All the Arabic words for homosexuality are really negative, derogatory, at least when I was growing up. So the language became like, I wanted to run away from the language because I also wanted to run away from the culture, and they became inextricable in a way. But as I got older, I began to feel that sense of huge loss. Like, how do you lose your native tongue? Like, how do you lose the language that was given to you by your parents, by your siblings, by the culture? And I started to kind of build my way back to it. So the return, in many ways, the idea of return, or the fantasy of return, began with, on the linguistic level, like trying to build bridges back to Arabic and relearn what was really my native tongue. What is my native tongue, I should say. And from that, I think the origin of the book kind of grew out of that, like the idea of a physical return as well as a return to the language.
So have you ever been back to Yemen since you
Not
left?
for a long time. I mean, yes, I've been since I left in 1988, so that's like more than 33 years ago. I've been maybe 4 or 5 times. The last time, however, was in 2006, so that's a very long time now. And my goal has always been to go back and spend time there, but then the war started in 2015, and then COVID hit in 2020, and it just came to push that return journey further and further back.
Right. So you chose really specific returns in this book. I mean, specific people. You're not talking about like general people. And the way that the book is, and I highly recommend people listening to find this book, because it opens kind of a door to history, to politics, to, I mean, you really use your journalism here to push, you know, the narratives themselves. So why these specific narratives? You have, you know, very specific ones, Taiwan, Ireland, Jamaica, Ghana, and then the Israeli-Palestinian kind of return. Why these specific ones? Why these specific stories?
So I really wanted this book to, like my last one, Brown, to be a work of journalism, a work of reportage, a work where you go outside of the self. I mean, it is based on autoethnography, and in a way, it is there is me as a thread that runs throughout the book. I mean, very, very briefly, like I do not occupy a lot of space in that book, but I'm there and I'm commenting and I'm listening to people. I really wanted to sort of to see what, if this return dream that I have, this idea of going back, how universal is it? Who gets to return? What is the conditions that sort of either force them or prompt them to return? And what happens when they go back? And I started by choosing destinations where the very idea of a homeland was contested, where there are people fighting about whose homeland is it. So the first reporting trip was from the Basque region, which has had its own, so it's a very autonomous region, but it's still part of Spain. And for the longest time through ETA and particularly through ETA, there's, waged the war of terror to liberate the Basque. So I kind of wanted to go to those places like Northern Ireland, in particular, Belfast. I see that Kenneth Branagh has a new movie called Belfast, and I'm really fascinated with that sort of Republican law versus loyalist. And then obviously China and Taiwan, because China always claimed that Taiwan is just a breakaway state and not an independent country. And then, the mother of all conflicts, the Arab-Israeli conflict, which kind of really hinges on who gets to call that land home, and who gets to return to it, and whose right of return is denied. So these destinations were definitely like and I'm very lucky that I was able to make those destinations. And then as the book expanded a little bit, I also wanted to include other kinds of conflict. So there's where the chapter in Jamaica. And then while I was reporting the book in a pre-pandemic, I mean, this is really, the reporting of the book is from the before times, as everyone is saying, like when you could just hop on a flight and go somewhere. And while I was reporting the book, I heard about the year of return in Ghana, which is a full year that the government of Ghana opened its doors to anyone who is of African descent to consider going back to Africa for any, briefly, for a visit, for a business, for a long stay, for permanent stay, to explore all the options of return. And I just could not pass that sort of opportunities at all. And it gave me access to stories of the African American and African Canadian experience, which was missing from the book. So this is a roundabout, sorry, let me say bad way to say, I started with countries where the conflict over the land was so pronounced and so violent, or has menacing overtones. And violent because I think the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Basque and Northern Ireland have had their share of violence, and I think the uncertainty around Taiwan is also a kind of menace that is lurking. And then from there, I just began to expand a little bit, and I wanted to add two more destinations, India and Armenia. But unfortunately, the pandemic happened, so I had to scale back and only include 7 countries. So.
Well, I think you've included quite a lot. And what I found interesting is, as I was reading through, we have, and as we spoke the other day in our meeting, I said that I have people who have gone back to Baghdad, and it's like for them it became, oh, the violence is much easier to deal with than being here on my own. So which is fascinating. It's really interesting to understand, because the violence is what made them move, right? So this migration happened because of violence, because of being displaced forcefully. So, I mean, with these stories, and you're talking about land, and why didn't these people find themselves in the land? Why have you decided to be buried back home in Yemen? And I say home,
right?
The original home or the native home.
Well, the answer to this is as varied as the stories in the book, because there are some people who were forced to return to their homeland, as in if you're deported from the US or Canada to Jamaica, that's not a choice you've made. You've been that choice has been made for you. And there are ones that were forced because of any number of reasons. For the people I met in Ghana and to some extent in Jamaica, anti-Black racism was really behind. As one of the characters in Kwame in the book tells me in the chapter in Ghana, is that he was just tired of being a Black man in the US. And for the first time, he's just living, as an African man in Ghana. And at 63, his life is finally beginning. But then there were the speculators, in a way, the younger men and women I spoke to in Taipei, Taiwan, and who are were affected by the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. There was like a huge, and now it's like, now that we've had COVID, it sounds like it happened like, oh my God, 20, but it's only, at the time I did the interviews, it was only 10 years before. And the economies in Asia weathered that financial storm much better than North America. And there was a kind of an element of going there and discovering what they can do. And in some cases, the people whose family moved them out of Taiwan to give them a better life, particularly American education. And in other cases, like Jay, who's the Canadian in that chapter, born and raised in Scarborough in Toronto, East Toronto, and never been to Taiwan, barely spoke Mandarin, and yet, a career this career has fizzled out, and he went and found himself in his father's homeland, because his mother is from mainland China. And so and then you have in the Middle East, the chapter set in the Middle East, you have the Jewish community who strongly believe that this land, Palestine and so on, is the promised land that God promised them through prophecy and through the Old Testaments, and it's not everyone I spoke to would have identified as Zionist, but most have identified as deeply Jewish and religious, and they feel that their spiritual connection is to the land of their ancestors. So the reasons are very complex and varied, but they all have either felt the pull of going somewhere that was up until that point a strange land. I mean, and they go back in many cases. They become strangers in their own homeland. Not every story in this book is a happy story. There are many unhappy ones.
Well, I think that is one of the things that always came up for me as I was reading. So like the concept of disbelonging is kind of found in the native home and the adopted home. You can't seem to overcome it, right? The longer you're outside that native home, you get more used to this adopted home, but still you don't kind of fit in either here or there.
I mean, I think it's what we would call in management speak, like managing expectations. I think people go back to their homeland with this highly romanticized version of what that homeland. But it's an image that's been frozen in time. If they grew up or spend time in that country, then the land they're longing for is the land that they left, say, in the 70s or 80s. And what has obviously happened, I mean, is that those countries have moved on with their lives. The culture has changed. The people have, even the language has changed. And they are not sitting there waiting for the citizens who left to come back. And what actually happens is that we who return always cast ourselves as the kind of the leading role. Like, we're going to come back to our homeland and we're going to be kind of the center of attention, or it's going to be welcomed. And yet, the truth is, we're just supporting cast. We're supporting players. The country is the country that you go back, and it has moved on. It has changed. And I discovered that going back to Egypt, to visit Egypt in 2019, and which was my first trip in almost a decade. And like the language itself, the Arabic language the colloquialism has changed, the cultural references has changed, to the point where, my Arabic sounded very dated and laughable, to be honest, because you will know this, like, and anyone watching us who knows Arabic culture will understand how important Egyptian movies are in that part of the world. And because the ones I've been watching on YouTube are all like old Egyptian movies from the 60s and 70s. And I'm speaking in English that is kind of, I'm speaking in Arabic that is out of date already. And that's, I guess that is what happens about we shouldn't expect that it's going to be a process of reintegration, and it takes time to leave our countries, and it will take time to get back into them.
Yeah, my aunts make fun of me because when I text them in proper classic Arabic.
Yeah.
And they make fun of me because they use like very, very normal and very Iraqi dialect when they're talking. So they don't use the classic Arabic, but it's very interesting to see how this shift happens where you think, oh, I'm going to go back, just like you said, and you're like a piece of a puzzle that fits right in, but you actually don't. You don't fit anymore. It's not. You're not a part of it. You have different ideas. They have, as you said, moved on. They've grown. They've changed. There are phrases in the language itself that have shifted.
Absolutely.
Right? When I left, we had like, do you remember those Nokia phones?
Oh yes, I do. I do. I do. Yes.
I had a Nokia phone, and you were very limited in what you could communicate with others. And now my cousins are on Facebook. They're on Twitter. They're on Instagram. There are those apps. What is it called? WhatsApp and what is the other one? I can't even remember now. But there's a community of my cousins, because I have like 54 cousins. There's a community of my cousins, constantly chatting from around the world.
Yeah.
And it's like I would be surprised by phrases. I'd be surprised by things they're talking. Like, for instance, I was talking to my mother yesterday, and apparently Iraqis who never had dogs or cats in the house, I shouldn't generalize, but kind of, now have pet stores and places where you can go buy specific dogs and cats. And my cousins, who are very religious and very traditional, all have cats in the house. So it's like these shifts. Right. I think to the foreign ear or to the Western ear is kind of silly, But for us growing up, where you were always told, no, you can't have a pet.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
Have a pet. Now this has shifted, like these really, really slight things. It's really interesting to see. So do you think that there will be a time when kind of this ability, you say, and on page 200, you say, how do you call a place your homeland when you've never set foot in it? So if you've never set foot in it, how do you? I mean, what did you find by the end of the book? Were you able to find an answer to that question?
Yes, I think the definition of homeland is not related to the place where you were born necessarily, or the place where you grew up, or the place where you spend your formative years. It can actually be, the notion of homeland can be inherited, just like your DNA and genes are inherited. And people can actually have a longing and strong feeling about a place they have never visited. I mean, particularly if you're, I mean, like if we look just at the sort of the Arab community, which is the history of immigration to let's say Canada, it goes back to the late 19th century, early 20th century. So now we're looking at maybe fourth, fifth generation, and that fourth and fifth generation is actually reclaiming their Arab identity, their connection to this, and in a way that is kind of preemptively, because as you know, this is an identity or a nationality or a national identity that is really mired in stereotypes and negative portrayals on television and in media in general. So a lot of them are sort of reclaiming that identity, and they go back and visit in the hope of kind of establishing something. To me, I mean, one of the aspects of the books that I liked in terms of the people I met is that, I mean, I met a lot of lost souls in this book, like a lot of people who are looking for that belonging. We should have talked before I finished the book. There are a lot of lost souls in this world, and I think I'm probably you and I are among them. And people who are the sense of belonging and homeland is constantly being interrogated and revisited, and I sometimes, I mean, the hardest stories for me were the ones who thought that by going home they have solved the problem. They have found that it's kind of almost like, the thing is, a lot of people think of going home like a pilgrimage in a way, that you will arrive there, you have this epiphany, you'll get some kind of spiritual and emotional content.
Blame it on the movies that always show this, very amazing kind of return and finding yourself, and kind of the eat, pray, love version of going back to the native homeland.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's I mean, that's all different kind of like finding yourself in other countries or other places that. But here, I mean, you have the language, you have the homeland connection through your ancestors. So you think that the natural answer to this is like, I'm finally home. But that's not the case in many stories, and it's something that I think about a lot. Is like I've built for the last 4 or 5 years while working on this book. Really, I started this book in 2017, so it's kind of coming up to 4 years now, coming up to 5, I should say. And but I've been thinking about it since 2016, and I feel like it has this return thing has used up so much of my energy and my mental energy, my writing energy, my emotional energy, and what if it's a disaster? What if it's what if it ends up really badly? It, in a way, I got a preview of that when I went to Cairo and realized that, yeah, as much as I love being in the mainstream, as much as I love the food, and I love the fact that I can kind of pick up on what's going around me a lot easier, just did not think it was my home. And I've lived 15 formative years in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm gonna switch a little bit, because a lot of our, people who participate or join us are people who are interested in writing, who have been writing, who, who want to publish as they go forward. And your work kind of does a balance between the personal and kind of the journalistic, if I can say that. How did you figure out how to do that? I mean, what gave you kind of that outline or plan? Was it planned from the beginning, or did it start as a, for your own project? You said it's an autoethnography.
Right. I mean, listen, there is a kind of debate in Canadian nonfiction about memoirs versus reported nonfiction, or ideas-driven nonfiction, or big books of ideas, big books of reporting, and then you have memoirs. And I initially I was kind of thinking that is like I need to stay away from the memoir. My first book was a memoir, and I've done that. I've written my story in a way, and for my second book, I wanted to move away from memoir. But you can't run from yourself. No matter what you do, and I do think that my second book, Brown, was also a book of reporting, but I was surprised when it was final, like how much of myself I put into it as well. For this one, I actually just really tried not to choose sides in a way, like to allow the book to be about geopolitics and heavily researched, and with like more than 100 interviews and voices are in this book. Like really my journalistic skills being put into good use, but also the storyteller and the personal narrative. And I just felt I don't need to choose sides, and I can do both. Like I can do both, but of course, in this one, the balance, as with Brown, the balance is actually in favor of the reporting, the journalistic work, the travel,
I like how you say that, but reading through, I mean, as a reader here, not a critic, or I'm not going to review or analyze or anything, but as a reader, I really felt your presence in the book, even though a lot of it was, like you said, there's history there, there's politics there, there's like I told you in our meeting, I learned so much just by going through the book, but you were very much a big part of it. And I felt there was a balance. And I think you start every part, you started with kind of your own reflection or something that you're saying, right? And then narratives are introduced and how they came about. But in general, there seems to be a balance between kind of, you're also discovering, is what I felt, kind of, each of these narratives, you have a question for yourself. There's a question in there, kind of, you're trying to figure it out. So I did feel that balance, which was really interesting for me. Usually when you pick up a book and it's all history and politics, you don't go through it as fast as I did with this one.
Well, I think that is a compliment. Well, no, listen, this is creative nonfiction still. This is like, I mean, it would be impossible to write this book without me in it, without my story being in it. But I like to think that my story is stronger for having put it in the context of other stories, and having put it sort of next to other stories and asked other people about their return journey and my own, and so it's, my story is stronger for having theirs, and theirs is stronger, or like it's filtered through my own return fantasy or my own return dream. I think I like to think, I mean, other critics or reviewers or whatever may think otherwise, but I like to think that this is a win-win situation, that this is it allows me to say why I wanted to return. I mean, a lot of it is personal. A lot of it has to do with my own observation of life in Canada in the last, say, maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And a lot of it is geopolitical and outside of my control. So I wanted to put them together in the same book and not do 2 separate books.
Oh, you have done a wonderful job with that.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to ask you to read for us if you can. I'm trying to look at the time. I think we have like 3 minutes, and then we have
Right.
to. So
Sure.
5 minutes to kind of present, and then we'll answer questions.
Sure.
And if people would like to support, I already see one. Andrea, thank you for your question. We will read it right after Kamal is done reading his section. And if anybody else wants to kind of jump in and include something, ask something, we'd be happy to answer those questions.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to be boring. I'm going to read from the introduction because that doesn't require a setup, a complex setup. I've been in many readings where people take like 3 minutes to set up the section they're going to read. So I'm just going to read from the very first page of the book. Where do you want to be buried? Since my date and I were walking alongside Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Midtown Toronto, the question didn't come as a complete surprise. Its morbidity threw me off nonetheless. I had planned this to be a romantic post-dinner summer stroll. My dream list of questions included, but was not limited to, do you want to move in together? And where would you like to go on our honeymoon? He and I had just braved the crowds at a nearby ice cream shop and devoured double servings of pistachio and chocolate gelato in a scene worthy of a rom-com. Toronto, I replied. Although I was born in Yemen, raised in Lebanon and Egypt, and educated in England, I had come to see Toronto and Canada as my homeland. I reveled in the kindness the city had shown me and the career opportunities it had afforded me. I dedicated my first book to it for giving me what I'd been looking for, a home. In my second, I called it my sanctuary, a good place to be brown. My love affair with Toronto started the moment I landed at its international airport on April 20th, 1996. Like many immigrants who have left oppressive regimes or escaped civil wars, I think of that arrival date as a second birthday, a parallel timeline in which life began just as I was about to turn 32. I no longer entertained thoughts of a secret, unled life because I finally had the one I deserved. I want to be buried in Sana'a next to my grandparents, countered my date, who was born near Detroit to a Yemeni family and had spent most of his adult life in the United States. Although he was a natural-born citizen, he didn't think that America deserved his remains. I remember thinking how fortunate I was to claim a dot on the world map as mine, one place for my body to play, love, work, grow old, and when the time came, to be put to rest. My date's words suggested an inner turmoil and unbelonging to which I was immune. That exchange took place in August 2012. Barack Obama was 3 months away from winning his second term as president of the United States. I knew Donald Trump mostly as a C-list reality TV star who'd had cameos in Home Alone and on Sex and the City, and as the gauche multimillionaire behind the racist birther movement. Back then, very few journalists and university professors were willing to defend with a straight face the free speech rights of bigots or adopt a both sides approach to one race-based conflict after another, at least not publicly. American democracy had exhibited signs of weakness before, but it was yet to receive the near fatal blow of the Trump White House. If I were asked the same question today, almost a decade later, I wouldn't know how to respond. I suspect I wouldn't be as definitive about Toronto as I once was. My date's remark, which seemed irrational and troubling then, strikes me now as reasonable and in a way prescient. Our relationship has ended, but the question lingers. So much has happened to recalibrate my affinities that I've been forced to rethink my resting place and where I call home.
Thank you, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions, so if you are okay with us going.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start with Andrea's question, and bear with me as I read through. Thank you for giving your time today. What are your thoughts on weaponizing of return as the Allied policies of
Repatriation.
repatriation.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to wear my glasses. Oh, I can't see anything. Of Soviet citizens, Operation Keelhaul following World War II, which had a number of devastating consequences. What do you believe the impact on psyche and a people's sense of belonging is? With thanks.
I don't know the specifics of that experience, the repatriation of Operation Keelhaul, but what I can sort of refer to in general is the weaponizing of return, and that weaponizing sometimes can be quite benign, and sometimes can be quite serious. So I'm sorry, I don't know that specific case, but I guess the closest to it is, after the Second World War, the sort of the return of the ethnically German people from Eastern Europe to Germany, the expulsion. However, what I'm thinking of, for example, is what China is doing to tempt or sometimes coerce some of its citizens who have been studying abroad, particularly in the science and technology, and to return to China to rebuild China's strength in those areas. And Andrea used the word weaponizing, and it is remarkable to me how many governments have turned return into a science, in a way, into public policy. The other place is obviously Northern Ireland, and the chapter that I talk about in terms of the sort of economic return of not everyone from who left Northern Ireland, but the wealthy and the people with corporate experience and business experience, particularly in technology and sectors that the Northern Ireland economy needs, to a kind of another I won't say when I say weaponization, but another sort of organized is the birthright trips that Israel offers to anyone who identifies as Jewish and would like to explore Israel, in the hope that eventually they'll come back and live, and they'll go back permanently and live there. All of these sort of suggest to me that the return is a kind of a pawn in a number of geopolitical conflicts, sometimes economic pawns, sometimes political. Like, for example, China always, I mentioned two scientists who were given the Chinese citizen of Chinese descent, but they were American citizens when they got the Nobel Prize, and China sort of repatriated them in a way and gave them the Chinese citizenship. So now it counts them among its tally of Nobel Prize winning Chinese scientists. So the long and short answer of it is that a long history of weaponizing returns, and also weaponizing deportation, which is the flip side of return. In the book, I talk a lot about how the European Union have used return to encourage immigrants to go back, particularly in Denmark at the moment. Actually, I'm reading a lot about the repatriation of Syrian refugees. They've actually, in Greece and other countries in the European Union, they've been given money to go home, to return to their homeland. This is one way to keep the borders of the European Union free from incoming immigrants. So yes, return is. I was the original, one of the original titles of the book was included the word the politics, the politics of return, because it's to me, I started with the homeland conflict. But I'm sorry, I'll have to look up that specific case. Okay, we have another question.
We do have another question. So I'm between glasses, and that's why I'm not reading properly. But
I can read them if you want.
I would love that, because.
Okay. Have you thought about continuing your exploration of returns in the context of the pandemic, which adds an additional layer of complexity to the question, or are you just ready to recharge your batteries after a deep drive into the heart of what home and belonging means? This is a question from Crystal Crow. Crystal, actually, the book was reported, well, actually, all of it was reported before the pandemic, and about 2/3 of it was written after the pandemic in 2020. So the book is actually kind of informed by the pandemic to some extent. I mean, there are a lot of references to the pandemic in it, because one of the big outcomes of the pandemic, or one of the things that is the idea of coming home, the idea of returning to your homeland, where you'll be either protected or saved. And I mentioned, like this, the chapter 1 in the book begins with a call from Global Affairs Canada, who like warn Canadians who are vacationing abroad or living abroad to find out what I'm reading here, find out what commercial options there are still available, and to return to Canada. And in many ways, Justin Trudeau made a plea for the return of Canadians abroad. And you remember that almost a million Canadians were repatriated during the early months of the pandemic. And then in India, the return of migrant workers to their home villages, a journey that was when the pandemic hit, everyone felt they would be safer in smaller communities in where they come from, and partly because the work dried up in the cities. And I mean, there are just so many examples of these great returns. New Zealand is the other one. New Zealand is one of the countries that has benefited the most because it's so, usually more people leave New Zealand than go back to it, than return to it. But since the pandemic, the ratio has flipped. And it became both a boon to the country, but also not everyone who returned had the skills that New Zealand was looking for. So the pandemic and return is I don't know if I want to write a whole book about that, Crystal, but the pandemic and my own feelings. I mean, it's not I couldn't go back to Yemen, so I'm not spoiling this the book for anyone who hasn't read it. But I mean, for many reasons, but the pandemic is one of them. Okay. Do you want me to continue reading?
If you look at, I've written some of these questions myself, but the writing is this big because.
Okay, well, I can do.
I don't want to make a mistake.
Okay, we have two. From Crystal Barnett. I'm interested in a line from the write-up from this discussion, and I do not think we touched on it much here, with all the hard things you have been looking at, both in your own story and others, and then especially with all of your reflections and writing from, I think you said 2016 to 2020. How do you maintain self-care while writing honestly and artfully? Did you need to take breaks, or was it also therapeutic? Oh, that's a great question. I think the first two books were far more emotional, because the first one was a family memoir. So that was really, and that I wish that was written 10 years ago. And I wish the term self-care was, or the concept of self-care was as popular as it is now, because I think I really did it in the worst possible way, where it's kind of writing and crying and intermittently. Brown was really hard to write because there was a lot of stories about suffering and exploitation of migrant workers. To some extent, this wasn't quite as there was an element in this book that was very emotional, but there was another side of it that was also an intellectual exercise, like what happens to these people when they return. But I would strongly recommend people, for all writers, if what you're writing is really draining you emotionally, to consider taking breaks, to take a break from the writing altogether, to practice self-care, like Crystal mentions here. And that could be anything. That could be just a tea break, a meal with friends, listening to your favorite music, going for a walk, petting a pet, if you have a dog. It's important that you practice that. I would say that my first two books were far more emotional than this one. Not that this one isn't, but there was also, as you get to your third book and you have more experience of how to look after yourself. I mean, mostly the physical traveling was draining, because you don't travel first class. You don't go to and you're always tired when you arrive, and there's all this sort of physical tiredness that come from traveling. And oh my God, I have a question from one of my former students, Omar. Hello, Omar. How lovely to hear from you. My question is about how immigrant parents often instill the romantic idea of return to their children who were not born in the homeland. Is this something you notice in your conversations? And if so, what are your thoughts on it? Omar is an amazing arts writer. I was in my arts writing class. Oh gosh, yes, I have noticed that, and a number of parents who, particularly in the chapter set in Ghana, Ghanaian parents really making sure that their kids know Ghanaian music and culture and raise them with values that are much more of children, like how you would raise a child in Ghana, as opposed to values like in the West. And yes, including the idea of why it was important to take them back to the homeland. And there's also the chapter set in Israel and the West Bank, in Bethlehem. The one who worked at the Badil Center, and her parents made sure that they and their children would go back in the summer to Palestine, and to not just to Palestine, but to the village where they came from. And now that she has 3 children, she actually did that herself. She uprooted them from, I believe it was somewhere in the Midwest around Chicago, and she took them back, and now they're all living in, not just in Palestine, but in their home village. In the home that her her grandparents left for her. So yes, and you know what my thoughts on it is like. I should say my thoughts on it is that there are other people who are also protecting their children from the home culture. They think that it is that it's in their best interest that they integrate into Canadian culture or American culture and just stop thinking about the home, because usually they've had traumatic experience that led them to leave their home, usually from like war-torn countries. But I do think that genetics win in that battle, and that no matter how much or how often the parents try to tell their kids, try to warn them about how the dangers that lie ahead if they go back to the homeland, actually the children's curiosity and their connection to this homeland, which kind of manifests itself in ways that are much deeper than anything they could control, actually wins. And many of them, go and visit at least, if not necessarily return.
Yeah, I think I've scarred my children for life.
But which side are you on? You end this. You answer this question.
I think they're very confused now. But it's like you're talking now, and I'm remembering. There will be days where I have, and I also listen to old Iraqi songs. I don't connect to the ones that they have now.
Yes,
from the 70s and 80s, Arabic or Iraqi or whatever, and I have up on high, and then I call them down to dance with me, and they laugh. They laugh at that, but it's that I want them to know. I kind of translate the words. They know the situation that we left.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're kind of holding on to these very precious memories, right, of home that you want them to have.
And technology made that so much easier for all of us now, because all you have to do is go to YouTube and find almost anything that you listened to as a child, no matter where you grew up in sub-Saharan Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Latin America, in France, wherever, you will find that music that culture or those movies illegally downloaded and loaded, uploaded, but
cartoon anime that we used to watch when I was 5 or 6, and you can put them on TV and we show the kids, and the kids are like, why did you watch this? This is really bad.
It's bad. Well, just for the Arab viewers, it's like some old Arab movies are charming, but they're really technically very bad. And the overacting. I mean, a lot of the people that we thought were great actors are actually really bad actors.
That's when you look at them, after you've grown up and you've seen other actors, you're like, that's not good.
Yeah, it's a lot of melodrama there. Yeah.
How they, my youngest, who's 13, picked up on, I think we were watching a play or something, one of the Gulf plays.
Right.
And he picked up on a couple of lines and he repeats them. He doesn't speak Arabic very well, but he keeps repeating these lines. So it's interesting to see how they get impacted by it. I think Omar's question is a good question. I'm guessing that his parents have tried to do that to him. So
no, he can answer that. I'll send him a note when I get up there.
Well, we have like 3 minutes of time.
Oh, we do? Okay.
I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and tell us about your journey writing this book. I do think it's very timely and very much something that many of us here kind of in the migrant world, if I could say that, are feeling from time to time. We actually, this is one of my students.
Okay. All right.
One more question. We can answer this question and say goodbye. Do you want to go ahead and read it? Come on.
Okay, I'm curious about what your thoughts are on people who cannot return to their homeland or are living in the dichotomy of having love for some part of their culture and homeland, but the homeland rejecting them because of their identity. For example, atheists born in countries with anti-apostasy law, or maybe people who see their country completely change the time they spend away from it, to an extent that their homeland doesn't represent their values anymore. Well, listen, I am a living proof of that. As a gay man, I know that I'm not welcome in my homeland, and this is one of the tensions in the book, and this is why I wanted a bit of myself in the book there, because I have this unresolved, sort of completely unresolved tension between wanting to go home, but also wanting to kind of keep my dignity as a gay man, and I am not religious at all. I'm not atheist, but I'm not a religious at all. So, and what happened in the Arab world is that there's been a move towards hardline Islam, and the Arab world that I grew up in was far more tolerant and I just I know this is another complication, and what I found is that other people are trying to resolve these tensions. So I talk in the book about this gay Irish man who lives in the city, but his dream is to go back to the little village where his parents come from, and he's trying to resolve that tension. Anyway, I think we're really out of time now, but thank you for. Our students are really smart. They've asked some very good questions.
Thank you so much, Namis and Kamal. It was such a lovely and heartfelt talk, and I really enjoyed listening to you talk about your writing, your perception of homeland, and the loss of language. I'm definitely picking up your book very soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
In closing, I want to remind our viewers that all the writers' books are available for purchase online from Wordsworth Books. Visit our online book table for a handy overview of all our festival authors' books. Don't forget that the next Wild Writers Literary Festival event is Forming First Connections, which is on tomorrow, Monday, November 8th at 7. And thank you all for attending today's session.
Thank you. Thank you, man. Thanks to everyone for the Wild Writers Festival. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Lamis.
Thank you.